Thank you for being here with us. And now let's move on to the next roundtable session, which will be about technology, the great hope to invert the trend on climate change, on CO2 emissions.
Italia, or IBM, Massimo Dal Checco.
So with us now, we have Enrico Cereda from IBM, Massimo Dal Checco from Citigroup, Lorena Della Giovanna from Hitachi, Lorenzo Maternini, Talent Garden, co-founder and vice president, and Alessandro Vitale, CEO of Conversate. And we'll be talking about technology and sustainability. While I was on my way over here, I was thinking about sustainability, and one of my first experiences was at IBM at Segrate near Milan. There was a huge parking lot, and I parked my car and I went in for an interview, and there was a sign outside saying, "Did you remember to turn off your lights, your cars, your headlights?" And of course I had, but I think 90% of people would have turned on their heels and gone to see if they had turned their lights off. And you didn't hire me at the end of the day. Maybe that was one of the reasons why. So technology. So IBM has and is developing a very glamorous technology and blockchain, in fact. You have a problem, turn to blockchain. In Italy, when you have a problem, you go to Cassa Depositi e Tecnici, and anywhere else you have a problem, you go to blockchain. And initially, the idea was that it was a new currency, but it's in fact a very powerful tool for permitting traceability, so that you can know exactly not how and where a product was produced. And if everything is certified every step of the way, then you know exactly what the product is all about. And you use blockchain technology for that. It's almost like an insurance coverage for products. I know that you have many initiatives running in Italy and abroad. Even Carrefour, major chains, retail chains, are using this tool. And it can be very, very powerful for some of the people we heard this morning, like African farmers, who can draw huge benefits from the fact that a company can say, "I buy these raw materials, coffee, whatever, in Africa," and that can be proven using blockchain technology. So I don't have much more to add, but I would like to reassure you that that sign about turning off your lights in the parking lot was around 20, 25 years ago. It's not there anymore because we have an app that tells people if they've left their lights on. So please be reassured that things have changed over the years. So what about blockchain? Well, this morning, and perhaps this afternoon as well, we were talking about the role of companies today, of enterprises today. What role should they have? They should be responsible towards society, and as well, what they do has to be transparent. So oftentimes over the years we've heard about technologies that are a bit fearful, artificial intelligence, the cloud, data security, etc. Well, blockchain is a technology that encourages transparency and trust. As you said, blockchain is a digital register. It's a bit like a distributed database which stores information, and just like a digital register, it can replace a traditional ledger or register. And this is how we're using it. We've run a number of international projects, including some here in Italy. Let's start with the international ones. Well, you already mentioned a couple of examples like Carrefour, Food Trust. We're also putting together a supply chain in the food industry, so particularly for retail companies, retail distributors. We've put together a number of retail companies like Walmart, Carrefour, and we're allowing them to trace their products from when a piece of fruit arrives, is picked in the orchard, right down to when it ends up in a supermarket trolley. So there's total transparency right along the whole chain. And these two retailers are creating this structure worldwide, and they're also taking on board a number of players in the retail ecosystem, not just Carrefour and Walmart, but many others as well are involved. You were talking about plastics before. Well, yes, plastic can also be used differently. We're running a program with a plastic bank, particularly in poorer regions, where we're dealing with the problem of plastics that over the last 50, 60 years, something like 8 billion tons of plastic have been produced. 80% of the 8 billion tons ends up in the environment, and the project aims to gather plastic in poor areas. So we're focusing on the Philippines and Uganda and places where, in exchange for collecting plastic, we can provide money for collecting the plastic and other types of benefits. And again, we have a blockchain system in place which transparently covers the every step along of the way in this process. Another project in Africa involves the distribution of fruit and veggies, and one big problem in Africa with regards to fruit and vegetable distribution is access to credit for the producers and the clients. Using blockchain technology and a transparent process, it's possible to transparently gather information about lending and borrowing within the food chain. So in Italy, we a month ago announced that we were cooperating with the Ministry for Infrastructure, etc., to try and diminish the problem of fraud. Blockchain technology is designed to create transparency and confidence and trust along the manufacturing chain of any product. We're running a pilot program in the textile industry specifically to guarantee that Italian products are covered and protected against imitation and fraud. So that's certainly very important. It's a project that we're running with one of the Italian ministries. We're running a pilot program for the textiles industry. But of course, our plan is to take it into other sectors as well. Right, let's go from the major national, international, or to the multinationals to the small firm. And, well, it's small, not really tiny, but Covent Garden and Impact Investment is one that you've also been involved with a bond that was issued.
E che è il secondo, tra l'altro.
So 44 million is the amount of this investment to develop your network, which has become the largest co-working network in Europe. So this is a different type of sustainability. Here, organization and technology are used to organize work in a different way, and this enables an exchange of ideas. Often in panel discussions, we talk about the ecosystem concept. Ecosystem means physical proximity. I've heard about people who've met around the coffee maker, the coffee machine, and they've decided, this happened in the Polytechnic Institute in Milan, and they decided to work with larger companies in that same location because this physical proximity generates ideas. And this is what happened. One company was producing smoke sensors, smoke detectors, and another was producing kitchens, and they decided to use this application to market a smart kitchen. So if the roast is burning, the fire alarm goes off. So that's how it works. What kinds of results have you obtained with your Talent Garden project? Yes, I'd like to underscore this paradox. We are in a digital, interconnected world. We have internet, and we yet feel the need to have a physical contact once again. So Talent Garden has been using this paradox. When we talked about sustainability, no one ever used a word, no one ever spoke a word that is linked to sustainability, and that's the concept of empathy. Today we talk about artificial intelligence and technology, and we're again talking about empathy. In other words, the fact that human beings know how to relate to other human beings, their understanding, their empathy, and they can gain some value from this physical contact. Now, Talent Garden has been defined as a network, a co-working network. I like to define it as a network, a platform where a community can express itself, because sustainability means to be able to express human talent. Now, we were created in a small city, not a large one, a small city where there are talents that work in digital technology, freelancers, startups. The SMEs of the digital world needed just that. They needed to meet at the coffee machine, have an exchange of experience, of work, working practice. So we created a hub for innovation. And we also understood something else, and that is that it wasn't possible to create an innovation hub in only one city. We needed to start thinking of a different action, a different approach. We had to start thinking about Europe. Because when we speak about innovation today, we can no longer just think about indoor innovation, but we have to consider a network, a connection, and that has to be national and European. So Talent Garden spread its model this way. We decided to set up centers all around the country. Now we are operating at European scale as well. In Talent Garden, we have 4,700 people working. We call them members. Why? Because this is the very concept. It's a community. I know why, because they pay their dues, so you're very happy to have all your members. If they didn't pay, we wouldn't have all this money to invest. No. Okay, so we do have the community, and these people can share international European experiences, and we are the facilitators of all this. Now, there's another beautiful point. This is a community of talents in the digital world. They were reasoning through ideas together, and this is in a labor market that needs these kinds of talents, these people. So the second step for Talent Garden was to create an academy, a training school. I call it the Digital Professional School. It is a school that can train professionals, digital professionals, all over Europe. This is what the market needs, and it has to be done in a pragmatic way. It has to be swift, because professions change all the time. So we need a network of people who are connected, who work in the digital world, and who know how to work with and in these modern times. What is the profile of these people? Who is it that wants to come to this co-working network? We have all sorts of profiles, the student, a freelancer, but we have large corporations as well. We have large companies today who've come with projects to Talent Garden, and this is because open innovation, which you know, and you know what that is. Open innovation means just that. It means a large company that needs to access this ecosystem. So we brought this ecosystem to a physical space and provided all these connections. So it's a digital SME. We have a market today. It's not a startup market. It's a market for SMEs. There's a future for this market, for these enterprises. They use digital technology for their business. Technology is not an end. It's a means. And that is why and how work is changing and developing. Massimo Del Checo is the president of Citigroup. We're talking about technology applied to Africa. You won a very important contract in Senegal, and you are developing something which is going to have a significant social impact. Electrical power, you're bringing it to Senegal, and we heard about the connection earlier. What we need now are networks. We need to bring energy, we need to bring connections so that they can have services, and we can therefore impact growing portions of the population. What has changed in this country?
Well, to start with, we found a country that's really fast evolving. It has a growth of 7% a year. Africa's huge. This is in a part of Africa that's really moving, and the environment was very positive because they want to outsource. They delegate third parties to manufacture. There are investments from North Africa, Turkey, etc. And they're also focusing on the distribution of energy. And that is really sustainable, because if you can distribute power effectively, you can grow the economy. You can avoid power outages in factories and in households. So we won a contract for digitizing businesses, and it's rather interesting because we've only been talking about the business providing power for businesses, but now we're starting to talk about the cloud technology for managing human resources as well. So there's a focus on people, how they work, what their skills are, what they need, what skills they require to achieve certain job levels, etc. And that's all very interesting. Something else that we're looking at is that we won this contract for a basic project. Well, the first one was worth $10 million, funded by the World Bank, and fortunately it was funded by the World Bank because the quality of the offering was considered to be extremely important. And when they ran that tender, Chinese companies participated. The technical specs were very minimal, but China's investing everywhere in infrastructure. There were Turkish tenders and others as well. They all thought they'd win, but in fact, we did. So in this stage, we started moving and talking about access to energy and its relationship with the economy in Africa. At least where we're working in Africa, everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a smartphone, which is a huge advantage. And being able to use a smartphone to make payments is all in the hands of the Chinese. So to help the Senegal Power Company to gain fees from these payments, well, we're coming up with an app where you can buy your power using your smartphone online. So we found in Senegal a country that believes in energy and in connectivity, not just virtual networks, but structural networks as well. Once they can produce enough energy and distribute it, they're obviously interested in building other types of infrastructure like roadways, airports and rail systems. This morning we were talking about metropolitan areas and cities. Well, Dakar used to be a very small city. It had an airport only 5 minutes away from downtown Dakar, and today they built a bigger airport 50 kilometres away, and it's been very successful because there is a second city developing around the airport. So there are these developments in infrastructure that are helping the country succeed. The former president was re-elected in the recent elections, and I would say that they're in an enviable situation in that respect. Yes, well, I would say so. So Lorena Della Giovanna, country manager for Hitachi. We've been talking about quote-unquote good technology and the positive impact of blockchain rather than digital technologies for creating smart cities and producing electricity. But there are fears. There are fears that technology might not ultimately be sustainable in terms of producing new jobs, so automation, artificial intelligence, etc. Sometimes they are late on the line. People don't know what might happen. There are huge fears, but there's also, on the other hand, a lot of confidence. Maybe all these technologies will lead to new jobs that we don't even can't even imagine right now. And just as has happened in the past, these new technologies will hopefully produce new jobs. How do you see it? You are technology producers, and how are you moving into this area? What sort of developments are you seeing?
Hitachi is a company that has always been an innovator. It was set up in 1910, so it's been operating with new technologies now for over 100 years, and we've been doing it with a focus on how to improve people's lives. So digital transformation is a natural consequence for us of this evolution. I like to speak of digital evolution, not revolution. And we've focused our strategy on the concept of social innovation. We operate in diversified fields, in diverse fields. We make investments in order to have a social impact. Energy, for example, water, healthcare, and transportation. We think that digital transformation is a huge opportunity, not only for our business, but to be able to contribute to the 2030 goals. And we embrace the transformation not only internally but externally as well. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In Italy, we've grown substantially over the years, especially thanks to acquisitions. A company like Hitachi, if you speak of globalization, it cannot possibly think of expanding unless there are acquisitions. About 50% of our world sales out of 80 billion are still in Japan after all these years. So globalization was still a huge challenge. So we have grown nonetheless, and we are the leading European country for Hitachi in Europe, in fact, and we have more than 6,000 employees, about 3 billion all told, and we operate in many different sectors. We have decided to be part of the Lighthouse project, the Calenda 2.0 agenda, and therefore invest heavily in factories. Not only factories, but the entire product cycle from design all the way to service provision. Why? Because our focus, in addition to doing business, because we're not anonymous, we're not a not-for-profit organization, so we have to create an economic value. We have to have a social impact on individuals, and then an environmental impact as well. So what have we done? We've decided to run a very strong innovation program in order to increase efficiency, optimize costs, and become more competitive, and therefore create more business for ourselves, and perhaps win more awards, and therefore have higher sales and hire more people on the one hand. On the other hand, we wanted to improve the lives of our employees. A very trivial example, a bricklayer and a welder, they are no longer doing that. They are operating behind a computer that takes care of the welding process. So we had in-house training to teach them these new skills. Sometimes you can find these skilled workers out on the market, but not always. So we've worked with universities to do this. And another important program, for example, is working together, in fact, because you can't possibly do it on your own. And there's also been a favorable impact on the outside, because the product that we've developed, a train, is more reliable, higher quality, and it is aimed at improving the passenger's experience from beginning to end with a very low environmental impact. So we continue to see the digital transformation as a wonderful opportunity to seize. Another example, I've already spoken about trains now. With the Seine Alliance, a shipper and forwarder, they had an issue with cost optimization, fuel cost optimization. I mean, a maritime shipping company, of course, has to deal with that kind of cost. So together with the captain, who is a very proud captain, of course, and he doesn't want to be commanded by a computer. So together with the captain, we decided to develop an artificial intelligence program which could help the captain to choose the best route for his shipping and therefore save in fuel costs, but also protect him from any accidents, which isn't trivial. So we're trying to replicate the same project. It was a co-creation project, and we're trying to replicate it in the rest of the world. Now, Alessandro Vitale. So from a multinational, we'll move on to a startup. You are the managing director of Conversate. So let's talk about Brexit. You were in England, and now you're in Italy, right? Okay.
So all things are not always bad. So artificial intelligence platform, and again, the subject is what kind of impact is there on companies thanks to what you do? The visual, physical impact on companies and people. Well, we are involved in chatbots. Imagine that you have a contact in your agenda. There's an artificial intelligence there that understands what you've written, decides what to do, and answers automatically. So it's creating a whole series of new services within companies. It's being used extensively to help employees do their work. For example, Prysmian, after Fiat, one of the biggest manufacturers in Italy, was a world leader. It bought the number 2 company worldwide with 30,000 employees worldwide using chatbot during the transition. It supported change for their employees worldwide. And it's also opening up a slew of new services for startups. For example, in my London incubator before me, they came up with Clio. And Clio is the biggest company in Europe whose aim is to disintermediate banks. In other words, they use a technology where there's a chat between client and bank, and they sell financial services. So there's a drive towards innovation, and banks and other companies are getting onto the market, gaining experience to compete with the new players with benefits for companies in terms of innovation and also with broader benefits for the community at large. And we're seeing whole new phenomena developing. For example, unexpectedly, chatbots work very well with the elderly. Bearing in mind that our populations are aging, for example, there is a company in Italy that is in lead generation, discovering people who need microloans and lending them money. And there is an app that deals with loans to the elderly, because young people have better relationships with technology. They are savvier, they can find solutions. The elderly don't want to know how the technology works. They just want to ask questions. So there are a whole series of new services that will be accessible thanks to the digital technology and bring benefits to people, not just the young, but also older people. The impacts are also quite fascinating. In the United States, lots of children, there's Alexa, that's used very frequently for chatting, and children use it who can't yet read. They ask questions and they get digital answers. So children tell Alexa, do this or do that, and their behavior has changed, and they're using the same orders for friends and adults. So the developers have changed the algorithms so that Amazon, for example, can tell that if it's a child using the app, they have to say please and thank you. It used to be television that parents would plop their children in front of to keep them good. But here, it's a bit different. Good behaviour is encouraged thanks to the use of these technologies. Right, so we're fast approaching the end of our panel discussion. we're running a bit late. So let me start with Chereda once again for a second round of questions. The other subject is obviously social impact and sustainability. And what about all the data that's collected? You know, healthcare data combined with treatment data, assisting the welfare system, helping to reduce costs so that technology can actually improve the healthcare system. And isn't it called Watson, this system that you're talking about?
Tutto nei paesi.
Especially in the countries that we were referring to today, where life expectancy is 81 to 85 years. I mean, I don't know that they have that in Africa. That's a dream for them. Now, before answering that question, I wanted to say something parenthetically and share with the participants here what was announced in San Patrignano with regard to IBM Foundation. We've spoken about the issues and new technologies and jobs and skill gaps that there are in many companies. And some recent data from last year says that 25% of the jobs that need to be filled are not because they can't find the skilled personnel. Now, with San Patrignano, I was saying, through our IBM Foundation, we launched an important activity, a form of cooperation, Teach the Trainers. So we will find the people who will train others, youngsters here at San Patrignano, so that these technologies can be disseminated. I think that this is a concrete commitment, and it is following the spirit of today's meeting. Now, going back to your question on the application of technologies, we call them exponential technologies, AI in health care. Well, these technologies are used in all industries, not only in the healthcare industry, but in finance and retail. We discussed this earlier, as well as in other industrial sectors. So why are these technologies so important? Why are they exponential? Because nowadays we have all sorts of data available. The data come from many different sources. For example, many data are generated by the Internet of Things, and it is only through the use of AI tools that we can find value in these data. So IBM applied the Watson technology, which is applied in many industries now so that this value can be provided through all this data. So I don't only like to speak of AI, but augmented intelligence as well, because I don't think that technology should replace people. And I'm remembering the words expressed earlier by Lorenzo on empathy. So it's augmented intelligence because the technology should be there to support the work and activities of human beings. Then, of course, there will be jobs that will be lost in this transitional phase. However, there are many other activities and jobs that will be created instead. So I think that we can say that technologies will have a positive impact, as we've seen in the recent past in many other fields. Well, on the subject of skills, when we talk about new jobs, we need new skills. So what about graduates in mathematics? They are hired in all sectors in a cross-cutting way, from the mechanical industry all the way through to universities. Is it hard for you to find people? Well, I would say yes. In Italy and in other countries, we often don't have the students coming from these secondary schools. In Germany, they have about 800,000 to 900,000 students each year in these technical schools, whereas in Italy, just a few hundred. So that's a huge gap between Italy and Germany, not only in terms of the students. Of course, degrees in mathematics and scientific subjects are very important in university, but then we also have this significant gap in the secondary school, technical schools. So it isn't only the university, but secondary schools as well. So this is an investment that is needed, and an economic policy needs to come to grips with that. Maternini, where are you investing the 44 million?
We're investing, obviously, in growth, in opening up new offices and social impact, when Ronald Cohen was talking about the third pillar, the third element, in addition to risk return, there was also social impact. Well, social impact for us is the number one value. It's the number one goal. And saying that we're not just talking about the 400,000 people working in Talent Garden, but everything that surrounds outside the walls of Talent Garden, that is our value, and that is where we are investing. And going back to the subject of sustainability, very recently I was in Silicon Valley, and I heard about an Italian who moved to Silicon Valley to scale up, and he said that this boy was embarrassed. His little boy had to go to elementary school, and there is a social gap that's being created, such that the engineer who goes to work at Facebook or goes to work with any of the big tech companies is earning huge amounts of money, massive salaries, but primary school teachers, public school teachers, earn large amounts of money for America, but it's just not enough to live on in San Francisco. And teachers only work for a short period of time, and they only do it almost as a stopgap. And that is where technology is failing in terms of sustainability. And this is a mistake we must not make. And I always say this, when we think about our model of development, our model of our business, our enterprise model, you have to be technologically addicted. Technology is the future, and this is all very well and good. But on the other hand, we shouldn't forget that technology should be at the service of humans and not the other way around. And leaving Senegal, coming back to Italy, what about the demand for digital technology investments? How is it? What's happening now?
I would say that with Industry 4.0, last year went very well, despite the fact that they reduced their numbers towards the end of the year. But nothing really changes much for SMEs. The opportunities are still out there. The digital divide compared to the rest of Europe is still pretty large. And let me just give you two figures. In Assolombarda, I am the chairman of the Digital Companies Group, and we conducted an analysis on the impact of digital technologies on businesses. And the smaller the business, the less they seem to have adapted to digital technology. So what Confindus is trying to do is to stimulate, to encourage these small businesses to invest here. Now, one of the strengths which we might leverage soon is to consider the supply chain, not only for Industry 4.0, but the larger industries, the larger groups have to help their suppliers make these investments along the supply chain. Even an SME that is part of a supply chain, well, unless it makes these investments, if one of the business models along the chain changes, because with digital technology you have to change your business model, you might not only earn less, but you might be left out of the market. Even so, if somebody, if one of them changes their system, they all have to change. And we've operated abroad. This has been an exceptional experience, and Assolombarda has helped us considerably here. And in fact, we've found this to be very effective, and Enel has supported us in devising our business model here in Italy. So I would say that overall the supply chain has worked beautifully. And since right now the sentiment of the SME in Italy isn't very high, Africa is so very close and it is growing beautifully, so we shouldn't be afraid to take that step. Now, Della Giovanna was talking about the Lighthouse Plan, which is seen as a model, and public funds are used there to implement new processes. So what is it that you've installed?
Well, on the rail side, we have 3 factories, one in Pistoia, Naples, and Reggio Calabria. 2 of them for producing metropolitan, underground trains and trams and components in one of them. And we have an innovation plan in place So we've installed robots, we've installed predictive maintenance systems, we've got a control towers, and innovations will be applied across the board. So this is where we've started, and they will then be integrated at the global level. And in closing, before we were talking about ethical problems when you apply chatbots. So, defining algorithms to work out what responses to use and what not to use, and identifying people. What's been happening recently? Well, there is a lot of talk about ethics and also about algorithms getting things wrong. But increasingly, the question will be where and when to use algorithms. For example, the community has asked for a moratorium to ban autonomous lethal weapons. Can you imagine a drone holding a missile with a camera on board and dropping missiles on the wrong place? So there's it's something very much like what happened 20 years ago for landmines. And there are other cases involving businesses. For example, recently there was a company that said we have developed software for interviewing candidates before actually seeing them and looking at their CVs. So the founder came in and said, yes, we've got artificial intelligence, and now while the candidate's talking, we can do facial screening and use algorithms to tell you whether he's telling the truth, if he's confident, what kind of profile he has, etc. And the company didn't actually think about whether the algorithm worked or didn't work efficiently or whether it was legal or not. He said, no, we don't want to do facial screening for our employees, period. So there will be increasingly powerful tools at our disposal, but we need to understand whether, efficient or not, they will be a benefit and will be sustainable in the long term for companies that may use them. Some firms are setting up committees because understanding the impacts of certain technologies on people is very difficult, and so they're setting up committees to train people and to make the right decisions. And of course, ethics is lagging behind somewhat, obviously, and once we have driverless cars, you'll have to understand what steps to take next. I don't think we've yet reached the right conclusions, but we're on the right track, I hope. So we're running a little bit late, but we have to close this panel discussion. Thank you very much, and let's be back.